Hi, this video is about quirky noun survivals from Old English. This is the fun stuff. These are the weird fossils that persist from this era and that imitate this era. To start with, let's contrast those with the regular survivals in modern English. There had been a strong, large, complex inflectional system in Old English, but now it's reduced down to a couple of features. We still have a plural S, and that survives from the masculine astem nouns. There is still a possessive S, and that comes from the masculine declension. And there's also a vestigial system of pronoun case reduced from the Old English system. Those are discussed in another video. Remember this basic pattern that once one rule becomes broadly useful, for example, once pluralizing things with S becomes the main way to pluralize things with S, all of the minority declensions will gradually fade and be overtaken by this mainstream declension. The pattern that happens is that people learning the language and speaking the language will generally use the rules they already know to operate new parts of the language. So a little kid who learns the word cactus is going to say cactuses, not cacti, and the same goes for any other irregular plural. Uh, it takes time to learn the irregulars, and that extra effort of maintenance is part of why they gradually fade under the dominance of the mainstream rules. The process here is assimilation, and it happens a lot. So there are less obvious fossils in modern English, though. Oxen was given as an example as the lone survivor from the weak nouns in modern English, although a few other nouns act a lot like it. Brother shouldn't belong to this. It was part of a minority group that had no endings, but in certain special usages, brother is pluralized as brethren because it makes it sound, I guess, old-fashioned and interesting. Children's a more interesting case. It's an older fossil. Child, in Old English here it's child, with the plural childer, pardon me, childer, um, slipped into German for a second. It's part of a very small fossil group of R plurals. Even in the Old English period, there were only a few remnants of this. Child and lamb used to be lamb, lembir. Lamb, of course, assimilated to the mainstream declension. Now lamb is lamb, lambs. But child, childer, kept its R and then got stuck in together with oxen, pardon me, among the N plurals, the remnants of the weak declension, so we have children. Um, that R plural is much more common in German. You still have Kind and Kinder and a much larger number of R plurals over there. Our pronoun case endings, in fact, the endings are what we should think of. They're also fossils from Old English. That's part of why we don't have apostrophes on our possessive pronouns. That's why there's no apostrophe on its if you're using it as a possessive, just as there's no apostrophe on his and no apostrophe on theirs or hers, for that matter. But our case endings are all fossils here. This can help us understand whom. The M on whom is the same dative M ending that's on them, that's on him, and that's on, in fact, if you look at your magic sheet, all of the dative plurals that end in UM. So if you're ever wondering whether to use who or whom, ask yourself whether you would use he or him, and you'll have your answer. It works in precisely the same way. And we've got a less obvious group still. We have a bunch of adverbs that end in an S. And these are in fact derived from old nouns that could be used as adjectives in their genitive form. So you can work this out by thinking about always. If you know that the genitive form S lets you use this like a little one-word adverbial phrase, then you can break apart the word all way plus adverb. This means in every way, and now it means at every time. But these S's here are all old genitive endings. And there are a few cases where they've accrued a T, as in against. We don't know why that happened, but it did. In British English, you still have needs, must. This can help us see how the genitive form works as an adverb. If you think about the parallel phrase, must of necessity do or be something, needs in this genitive form has the same sense as the kind of possessive phrase of necessity. Nobody uses this anymore. I think Emma Thompson uses it in the language in the movie where she likes Joni Mitchell. Um, what is it? It's Love Actually. It's great. You should watch it. It's a good Christmas movie. But you basically have to be Emma Thompson or maybe Julie Andrews to ever say needs must. No one else gets to do it. Also, American students do not get to use amongst and whilst. They are Britishisms. So there, but they belong to this family. Don't use them. There are some cooler fossils yet. We have a thing called athematic nouns, and they survive. Now, you can think of these as stem-changing nouns, although historically that's not the best description of them. These do not work like our strong verbs. These are not formed from ablaut the way strong verbs are. These are formed by something called I mutation, by vowel mutation, and it works like this. The ending used to have a front vowel in it. So in Proto-Germanic there was this word fot, which means foot, and the plural was fotes. And because you had a back vowel, but you were getting ready to say the front vowel in the ending, that back vowel moved forward in your mouth. This is called fronting, or I mutation, or, confusingly, if you're into German, this is called umlaut. This is what you're spelling when you put two dots over a vowel in German. You're spelling the fact that a vowel has been fronted historically. So that fot in its plural form had this ending, fotes, which you'll notice lines up beautifully, just perfectly with Greek podes, which is the plural of foot, and you saw that on all the Grimm's Law charts. But in the Germanic languages, that O assimilated to the front vowel in the suffix and became fotes, which is fine. But then, once your plural form sounds different from your singular form, the ending becomes less important. And so you can get away with saying in Old English, and this is attested, thought or fit or fate with that long E there. And in modern English, these are very recognizable. We just spell those long vowels by doubling them. We have foot and feet. Now the vowel has changed. We'll get to that when we're in early modern English. But that's why we have some some nouns that make the plural by changing the vowel. This is not the same as ablaut. This is a different process. This is not Proto-Indo-European. This is a pronunciation change that happened because of the influence of the vowel in a syllable that's not there anymore. This is I mutation, or if you care to say it, umlaut. And we have a bunch of lovely nouns that do this in English. We have Old English moose and meese became mouse and mice. We have Old English bok and bake, which should have evolved into book and beak, in fact, would be the plural of book. But like most other minor declensions or minor noun patterns, this noun assimilated to the mainstream and went books, I think, to the disappointment of everyone. And then you get some oddball developments too, where semantics come into play. So in Old English you had brok and brech. Brech is a plural, and it means your pants. But eventually, once the origins of that word became obscure, people couldn't just talk about wearing brech anymore. They repluralized it, so we have breeches. That's where they come from. And of course, nobody bothers to talk about breeches in the singular anymore. They're always a pair. These are collective or group nouns like scissors, and there's no sense in having a singular version of them anymore. That rather begs the question. I don't know why there was a singular version in Old English. I think it had to do with, I don't know. The analogy is probably to sleeve and sleeves. It's sort of silly to think about having one sleeve, isn't it? We still have unmarked neuter plurals. If you've reviewed your magic sheet, you've noticed that the long stem, strong neuter nouns don't have an ending in the plural. So in Old English, the plural of word, woord, is woord. Isn't that nice? Of course, almost all of those nouns have assimilated to the mainstream and they follow the masculine declension. They go word, words. So they've become regularized. But deer, deor, which really meant critter or beast in Old English, could be any big four-footed animal, could be a deor. And in fact, sometimes it was used metaphorically of people. You could be a battle beast, hilde deor, if you were like Beowulf. But deor survives as deer. It's been semantically narrowed into modern English a lot, and it still has an unmarked plural. This is just a fact of its origins. The unmarked plural is a fossil from the Old English neuter declension. It's not a problem. However, by analogy, we've started to use a lot of English words in the same way when we're talking about animals that we think of in groups. So we don't pluralize sheep. In Old English, it was fish, fishas. It was in masculine A-stem noun. But now it's fish, fish. We don't bother to pluralize it. We think of them in collectively. And then we have moose and moose. This should make you say, wait a minute, why is moose not meese? Would you like to know? The reason moose is not meese is that moose, if you look in the OED, was borrowed into English in the 1600s by English-speaking colonists who encountered these giant animals in the New World and borrowed the Algonquin word for them. So the word moose came into Old English, came into early modern English in the 1600s. That's a really long time after those athematic nouns lost their endings back in Proto-Germanic. Are words like goose, geese, mouse, mice, louse, lice, man, men, those are all fossils from Proto-Germanic. And moose is not a fossil from Proto-Germanic. It came in after the change in the 1600s as a borrowing. Weirdly, there was an Old English word for this creature from back before they killed them off. You know, back in Scandinavia, they still have them, and it was elk. But the colonists met elk first, so they used up their word for a really big deer, elk, on this creature called the wapiti. And then when they encountered the other one, you know, the bullwinkle kind, they had to come up with another word for it, and they borrowed an Algonquin word. So we also have, and now we are out of the realm of fossil plurals from Old English. Since we're on the topic of plurals, let's talk about some irregularity in a more general sense. Sometimes we borrow plurals into English from other languages, and this is a familiar list. Cactus, cacti springs to everyone's mind. And then what confuses us sometimes as English speakers is that the Latin US ending is not a reliable guide to all of the endings that word had in Latin, because there were a bunch of different kind of tribes of nouns in Latin. And corpus, of course, being a third declension neuter, is corpora in the plural. And you'll see that, but only in stuffy publications. Data bugs everyone. Pedantic folks like to insist on data being plural, these data, and never saying this data. A single point should be called a datum if you're one of those people and you care about the Latin. And of course, we have formula and formulae. And continuing from that, we have to wonder, well, what should you really say about a Prius? Because a Prius is an ordinal number that really ought to follow the third declension because it's an adjective, and a comparative adjective follows the third declension, so it should be Prius priora, and obviously assuming they're neuter. But That's kind of ridiculous. And then we get into further problems because Latin's a gendered language and modern English doesn't use grammatical gender. So when we're talking about former students, is it an alumnus, an alumna? And then do we use the masculine or the feminine plural? And the answer to this is really these words will all gradually assimilate to the mainstream rule in English. So we just scrapped the singular for data because nobody cares about it. And we use one word, data and data. And formulas we regularize. Priuses you should regularize. And many people prefer alums. It makes really more sense than trying to wrestle over alumni or alumnae and deal with a gender question at all. It gets even more fun when we talk about plurals borrowed from Greek. We might want to pluralize octopus as octopi, but that would be assimilating it to a Latin declension. We could do it. We can also call it an octopodes, but that's kind of ridiculous, even though it'd be closer to the Greek, and so most people just don't pluralize it. Octopus, we can assimilate this to the other nouns that we use for animals. One octopus, two octopus, it's really just not a problem. Hippopotamus is another problem. We could use the Greek plural, we could use the Latin plural, or we could just call them hippos, which would make even more sense. We can regularize it. And of course we can, without being so informal, we can call it hippopotamus and treat it as an unmarked plural like deer or sheep, the way we treat most herding wild animals. To go even further into the weirdness of irregularities in our plural system, we have explanations. We have a small group, and this is not exhaustive, but these are some important examples of fake plurals. We have some words that we treat as plurals of each other that are not etymologically related. So this is kind of fun. Cow really ought to be cows. In Old English, it was a stem changing plural. It was like foot, feet. It was ku, kiye. But there is an archaic plural kine that comes around. It probably has something to do with the genitive case, kuna there. But those are the options for pluralizing cow that are consistent with its origin in Old English. But in fact, we use this other word, cattle. Cattle has nothing etymologically to do with the word cow. It comes from an Old French word for property. It's cognate with chattel, and that word for property goes all the way back to Latin capitale, which is that's related to the word for head, and that's the way you count your wealth in terms of animals. In its roots, this word has nothing to do with the word for cow, even though we use cow and cattle sometimes as the singular and plural versions of each other. The same goes for person. The plural of person is persons, but and it comes ultimately from the Latin persona, which is the ancient term for one of those big dramatic masks you wear in ancient theater productions. So, and that's why person. In fact, we've brought that Latin word back in. That's why persona has that sense of yourself as a performed presentation, your deliberate presence that you present to somebody, being etymologically redundant here. So persons, if you want to pluralize persona, we still use personae with the, or personae with the AE at the end of it. But we treat a person as the singular of people, which is an etymologically distinct word. Comes to us through Old French from Latin populus, which is the population. It has nothing to do with the Latin word persona. And in fact, if you look at a language like Spanish, there's a language where these words have been kept distinct. In Spanish, you have no problem saying persona, personas in the plural, and pueblo and pueblos in the singular and the plural when you're talking about communities. When you're talking about peoples, you say pueblo and pueblos. In English, you could say peoples and persons, but that strikes folks as pedantic, and in common use we've begun to merge these words that come from different origins and treat one as the plural form of the other, even though they don't originate that way. So now you've got a bunch of pedantic party tricks to pull out. I'm sure it'll make you all more popular with your respective peoples while you're deploying your persona, but I doubt it leads you into any great capital wealth. Don't have a cow.